Hello, and thanks very much for inviting me to come and talk today. It's a great way to finish the end of term, I have to say, to come and sort of talk about your research again and go off for Christmas feeling all inspired. So yes, thank you very much for inviting me. Let me just check out the technology. Yes, okay. So I don't want to talk too much about the background because we've really come here to talk about methodology and to talk about the video methodology particularly. So I'll just say just a few quick words about what we were actually looking at with our video methodology. So we were interested in work-life boundary management, and that's usually construed on a kind of individual perspective as something about individual preferences for how they want to organise their lives. So people talk about having preference for a segmented life, for example, or preference for an integrated life in terms of work-life boundaries. But we wanted to take more of a practice perspective on that. We were interested in much more of the daily unfolding of work-life boundary management, if you like, and we wanted to look at how that was situated and accomplished. And that means we need to pay attention much more to the detail of that on an everyday kind of basis. So looking at things like the materiality of that, the spatiality of that, the timing, and also how we move through space. And that's difficult to capture with traditional methodological tools. So we decided as part of the Digital Brain Switch project to look particularly at the everyday practice of work-life boundary management, and we wanted to focus on how people use digital devices within that. So are digital devices helping support work-life boundary management, or they interfere with it? What's the issue there? And that was funded by the EPSRC and was an interdisciplinary study involving social scientists and computing scientists working together. And I just want to show you a little video actually of one of our participants who will tell you, and hopefully you can hear him properly, of what the project was about and why it needs research.
Hello people, I'm filming. I'm recording my transitions from the digital world to the real world, and work-life balance, and whether social apps help or hinder. Yeah, apparently that's where the research is. Yeah. Don't really know. So if you don't mind being filmed a bit, actually that's all I'm going to do.
So I don't know if you could quite hear that, but he said, it's work-life boundaries, and one of them said helps, and the other one said hinders. And he said, well, that's why they're doing the research, and that's right. So thank you very much for that. I think that was Michael. So I'll go straight on to our video methodology. We thought that using video methodology might help us to capture those moments of accomplishment of boundary management during the course of the day. If people were carrying videos around with them, they could video them as they happened. And also we thought that because of, I don't have my phone with me, but because of the nature of the technology that we use, mobile phones in particular, that's transitioning between work and life, to use rather difficult terms really, could be much quicker, more like a switch. That's why we call it the digital brain switch, because you can just switch very easily between applications on your phone, for example, between Facebook, which you might be using quite socially, and say email, which you're using in a work context. So that's why we called it a switch. And we realized that these were going to be very specific moments that we had to capture. So in terms of an overview of the methodology, we had 3 groups that were taking part in this. There were 45 people taking part altogether in 3 groups, and we had selected these groups specifically because we thought they might have particular issues with boundaries. Social entrepreneurs, because they purport to be working on things that are personally of significance to them, so they may have more permeable boundaries. Office-based workers, we were looking for people who actually went into an office every day, 9 to 5 kind of thing, and then came home and that was it. And students, partly because of being a younger generation, but also because they might have more permeable boundaries as well. We had selected them basically on theoretical grounds. And then we decided that we would ask them to keep video diaries. So this is a sort of participant-led application of the video methodology, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. But it involved briefing them first on how they might use the technology, and then debriefing them afterwards, to check that everything had gone fine. And as part of that experience, we realized that the videos were also useful as a reflective artifact. So it wasn't just that we were capturing those moments, but the participants were capturing them as well. And I'll say a bit more about that in a minute as well. And of course, we didn't just do the videos. We felt it was very important to then interview them afterwards about the video diaries that they'd kept, because, you know, we had to make sense of them, but also we wanted to embed them in the sort of a larger narrative, if you like. So we would just have these little snippets of what they'd done during the week, and we needed to embed that in their whole sort of life history, why they were doing what they were doing, what the context was, and so on. And also we took that opportunity in the interviews to reflect on the study, and particularly the use of the video camera. So as I said, it's participatory video method. So by this we mean that the participants themselves were keeping the video diary. You find within video methods that there's quite a distinction between either the researcher taking the video, like I could be standing here now videoing all of you, and in fact I'm being videoed as I'm doing this, so there's a weird thing going on there, or participants having control over that process. And we wanted them to have control over that process. We wanted them to define what was interesting and important to them. So they were acting more as movie directors in a way. They were making a movie of their lives for an audience, but at the same time researchers into their own lives. They were kind of observing themselves as they were going along. And we wanted them to decide what a switch was for them. We didn't want to say to them, you must video those moments when. We gave them a rough idea, you know, it's movement between work and life, but we knew that they would define work and life quite differently than perhaps we would, or they might not make a definition at all. So we wanted them to video their own transitions and to decide what technologies were important to them. You know, it might be laptops, it might be phones, it could be all sorts of things. And also for them to define what boundaries were salient to them. So we didn't give them much of a steer about what they should be looking at. It was up to them. And then, as I said, what we discovered, and we didn't plan for this, we didn't go in thinking, you know, the videos themselves will make a difference. We thought we'd be doing some intervention thing afterwards. But actually, keeping the videos themselves meant that they were also watching themselves. They were kind of observers of their own lives. Now, often, when people talk about reflexivity around video methods, they're looking at the analyst, they're looking at the researcher. So the researcher looking at the videos, how can we make sense of those videos? You know, what's complicated, what's complex about the situation that they were in? How is the participant being positioned in these videos and all that sort of thing? And we've certainly written about that in a different paper. So we've written about the kind of reflexive relationships between the researcher and the participant and the video camera, and how we are all positioned in that space. But that's a different paper. It's in Organisational Research Methods, and you can go and look that up if you like. In this talk, I want to talk specifically about the participants' reflection on their own videos. And in our case, so video as reflexive or reflective artifact is, you know, fairly well known sort of method, but perhaps less utilised than others. And it's basically about trying to reflect back unnoticed or tacit practices. So we're assuming that people are engaged in practices and they don't necessarily see themselves doing it. They don't necessarily know they're doing it. So this is to reveal some of that, if you like. And that can be done on an individual or a group basis. And it can be done by the researcher videoing or an individual videoing themselves. So quite a well-known example of this is from Carol et al., who videoed I forgot what you call it, ICU unit in a hospital. And they videoed the handover period, and then the researchers videoed it, and they showed it to the group that work in the ICU unit. And but after they'd watched this video, they were all amazed by what they saw, the medical practitioners, and they immediately changed their practices within a week. Even though the hospital had been asking them to change their practices for months, they changed it within a week because they saw what they were doing. It was all revealed to them, and they thought, oh, this is wrong. You know, we should be doing this differently. So, you know, there's that kind of way of doing it. But another reason for doing it is because participant meanings can't just be read off the images. You know, that it's important that you talk to them about what those images mean after they've been created. And of course, you could get reflexivity or reflective practice during the filming or afterwards, after you watch the videos. And because we'd asked them to make their own films, we were in a position to see something of their immediate reflections as they were making the videos, as well as the interviews afterwards where we talked to them about their video making. So I just want to talk about a couple of those videos that they captured as they were unfolding, if you like. This is David, who's talking about he was in his home office, talking about his working in the evening.
So I was going to write down a couple of things, but I've actually been a bit more absorbed.
Sorry, can everyone hear that? Is it too quiet? Should I turn it up a bit? Too quiet? All right, okay. I thought maybe that was the problem with the last one.
So I was going to write down a couple of things, but I've actually been a bit more absorbed and ended up doing a bit of the work that I thought I was going to do tomorrow. So that's good. It's I've got it out of the way, but I suppose it demonstrates having your work in the house like this. It can be quite easy to get sucked into it, even when you're trying not to be. So I'm now going to go downstairs and watch a bit of telly and then see how I get on after that.
Okay, so we can see there that he's been videoing himself actually noticing what it is that he's doing. Now, I'm not sure that it's necessarily because he's seen himself in this case, because he's videoing at the same time, but actually just doing the research, just being part of the research was drawing his attention to those kind of practices, so he was focusing on them much more. So it's not just about viewing it. But he does show us there how he's interpreting what's gone on. He shows us the space that he was in. I think there's quite an interesting thing about he's explaining his loss of agency there. So I came in, I was only intending to do a small amount of work, but look how the computer sucked me in, look how the room is set up. That's why I wasn't able to, that's why I got more involved and I did more than I meant to. So he's kind of explaining his loss of agency there around the technology and the physical space he finds himself in. Our second example is even more specific, really. This is Mark.
So I'm finding it interesting that I'm switching between my private emails, my business emails, and my company emails. It's constantly kind of back and forth, and I'll do a couple of emails, and then I'll switch back to the other one, and then I'll come back. And probably what would help to the whole sense of overwhelm is never really getting anything completely done because it just never ends. Thought of the day.
What I particularly like about this video is the fact that he's videoed himself face on, so it's like you could hearing his internal thoughts kind of thing. And he's just at that moment been putting together some of the things that he can see himself doing. So it's capturing a kind of moment of realization, which explains his feeling of being overwhelmed. He's realized why he feels overwhelmed because he's switching between his emails all the time. He's making sense of his boundary practice, if you like, in a new way. And just demonstrating the easy permeability of his work-life boundaries there, because he can just click between different accounts very quickly. That's the end of the videos, I'm afraid, because now we're moving on to after the video diary. So when we were talking to people afterwards, either in the debrief or the interview about their experience. So at this point, participants were discussing, if you like, the effects of the videoing on them. And we've borrowed some phrases here from Carol et al., who've suggested that videoing yourself and looking at the videos afterwards can sort of present the world in a new way to the viewer. And also, but at the same time provides a bit of distance. You're kind of distanced from your world because you're watching it through a video screen and you're seeing it in a slightly different way. It's revealing those kind of tacit practices. But they do emphasize, I think very rightly, that vision does not reflect reality. It's just an opportunity, it's a basis for a reinterpretation of what you're seeing. And they just suggest that there's three sort of aspects to this reappreciation or represencing of your practices. So they talk about reappreciating practices, and we have an example here from Simon. I already knew that I did a lot of focusing between appointments, either when walking or driving. What I learned from this study was the role of my conversations with people. So he had videoed himself in conversations with other people in moments of transition between different places that he was working. And what he's discovered from this is that he thought that he had those moments of transition just in his own head, but actually he's discovered that it's in talking with other people that he's getting lots of other ideas. So he's discovered that by doing this videoing, it's kind of reconstituted his notion of his reflection at that period. And then in terms of Liz here, there's a an aspect of revisiting the practice and rethinking it. I was surprised sometimes I would have about 3 different screens on the go. So sometimes I would have the television, the laptop and my phone, or sometimes on the train I might have the laptop and the iPad and my phone, all open at once and various things. I always sort of knew I was doing it, so it's not completely unknown. But the filming made me think, oh, that's probably a bit extreme. And I think the interesting thing is here that she's done the filming knowing that some audience is going to see it and actually becoming an audience for it herself. So it has created that kind of distance, and she's seen it like with new eyes, or possibly thought, how's this going to look to other people? This is going to look a bit extreme to other people. So she's revisiting those practices. And then finally we have here Cressida, who wasn't really very keen on social media at the time she started out in our project. She did a bit of emailing and things, but nothing much else. But after doing the project, I think it's triggered my going onto Twitter. I think getting through that week was quite a challenge for me because I knew I'd have to discuss my inner-outer world with other people. You've started a process in me which is much more about sane engagement with technology rather than insane engagement with technology, if that makes any sense. So again, taking part in the project and filming herself has made her rethink what she's going to do in future. And in this case, I think she's kind of reconceptualized the notion of the boundary. So it's not a boundary between public and private, it's a boundary between what's personal and public and what's personal and private. So she's kind of rethought that boundary in terms of her participation in the project. But the really important thing perhaps to look back on as well is that, okay, so that was, all those are about sort of accepting the video evidence, about sort of thinking again or reappreciating or revisiting what you're doing. But we also had these really interesting examples where people would talk about the example and say, but it's not as it looks, if you like. So here, this is Rachel. The main thing I would take away from watching the video is I feel quite regimented. I put the kids to bed, I'll literally straight away put the laptop on. It's quite sad the amount of time I spend on my work, but it doesn't feel like work. When I think about how my friends live, what I'm probably doing is vastly different. So what she's saying is, the important thing to recognise is Rachel was a social entrepreneur. So she had given up a lot of things to do a job that required a lot more melding of work and life and a lot more activities. And what she's talking about, this work that she's filmed looks like the work she was doing before. She looks like the work that any paid employee would be doing when they'd be working all sorts of hours and still on the laptop. So she's got to redefine it. It's not work. It's not work like their work. It looks like their work, but it's not work like their work. It's a different kind of work, is what she's arguing here. So I've made this film, it looks like this, but this is really what it's about. And similarly with Kath, who was one of our office workers and a parent of small children, made me more conscious of how much technology has pervaded my life. I consider myself to be an outdoorsy person, but I'm always taking the technology with me. Makes me conscious of when I'm with my children, how much attention I'm giving them, and perhaps not pushing them on the swing as high as they want. I think those elements come out in the filming, so they're there, the visual evidence is there, but I think that's modern life. Everyone's using it and doing it, that's just the way it is now, that's modern parenting. So I've taken this video, it looks like I'm a bad parent. But I'm not, because that's what parenting is like these days. That's just what everybody does. So I'm kind of interpreting the video for you, if you like, in a more positive way. And finally, Jed's, I appeared more tortured than I felt in the videos. Looking at my self-expression made me look stressed. It made me appreciate how I can do very long hours sitting in front of a computer, thinking that I'm being engaged with the world, but really just sitting statically in a space. How punishing my digital life is, but I do care a lot. So again, Jez is a social entrepreneur, and he's expressing his kind of caring for others, his trying to right social wrongs and follow social goods through his work. He's videoed himself, but he looks like he's just sitting at a computer like everybody else. Like everybody else, he's just sitting at a computer, looking quite tortured. And he wanted to reinterpret that, but he wanted to deny the visual evidence in some ways and say, but I wasn't really feeling inside. So you can video me and you'll see this, and I look like I'm stressed, but inside. So he's really making a distinction between what happens outside and what happens inside. And also, emphasising that thing about being a social entrepreneur and being really committed, and how his work on the computer is just an expression of his commitment. So I have massively run out of time, but I will just say two things, a couple of things about this. you know, there are lots of good things about using participatory video. We do manage to capture those everyday things, you know, as they happen, except of course you must remember that the participant is the movie director, so they're videoing certain things actually. Video cam can't go everywhere, so we quite often get people saying, I've just been on my phone while I was showering. And they, not quite what they mean, but they weren't going to take the phone in with, they took the phone in with them, but they weren't going to take their video in with them. Thank goodness. Visual images don't speak for themselves. If you give participants the opportunity to video what they want, they video what they want. And sometimes what you get back is not quite what you expected. And it can be a good thing, but it can be a bad thing as well. We have plenty of just images of PC screens, for example. So sometimes the resulting film can be a bit mundane, or it appears like they've gone off topic, but that can be interesting in itself. And of course, there's this whole issue of if you're filming yourself, you're kind of disciplining what you're going to show, which we've discussed in a different paper. The great thing about this in terms of the impact agenda, which we're all very interested in now, is that, you know, they were actually seeing what changes they could make as they unfolded, and were not relying on us to tell them. They could see for themselves as it was happening. So it wasn't all about us coming up afterwards and saying, you must do this. They had learned themselves what they needed for themselves. So they don't need that specific expert intervention. But it is important that that self-videoing is situated in interpretation afterwards in the interview, that we knew about their backgrounds and so on, so we interpreted the videos with them to a certain extent. And it does give the potential for challenging their own evidence. So that's my conclusions. We think it's important to capture those ongoing negotiation of boundaries for looking at work-life boundary management. There's a lot of quantified self going on at the moment, you know, where you measure yourself with a Fitbit and all the rest of it's all very quantified. But video capture takes us a bit beyond that, perhaps. But it's important to interrogate the idea of what's seen and what's unseen in terms of the video. Something might be seen and look therefore as if it's real, but you know, there's interpretations that go along with that. Okay, thank you.